Hello and welcome to Talking TSM, the Game House's talk show about TSM's LCS team. I am Robert Haynes, and I will be your host, your tour guide into the world of TSM. Some very interesting news just broke. We're going to get to that here in just a few moments. First off, as always, with announcements, as a reminder again, you can find the show on every single one of the podcasting forums that you use, including the YouTube, as I like to call it, on the Game House's YouTube channel, something that a lot of you have seemingly taken a liking to and your preferred method currently of listening to Talking TSM. Please make sure to follow and subscribe on all locations wherever you listen, and hit the bell icon if you're on YouTube and subscribe so that you don't miss another episode. I'm excited to let you guys know that we are going to be having our very first fan segment today. Woo! Super pumped. Y'all should get hyped for that. If you are somebody who would also like to come on, give your thoughts about the team, especially during this off season, please make sure to reach out and let me know. Also, make sure to follow TGH on all social channels. Facebook, you can find us at the Game House Esports. You can also find us on Twitter at TGH Esports, and you can follow myself at TGH Robert Haynes, Hanes. Now let's get into the news really quickly, and then we're going to get to our fan segment. He has been patiently waiting. He and I have been talking for a couple days about this now, so it's kind of convenient that the announcement happens pretty much when I was getting ready to do the podcast anyway. So the big news, Doublelift has announced that he is retiring. And wow, I have so many thoughts about this, but I want to get into the fan segment first and then kind of go over what my personal feelings are for this a little bit within the segment and more afterwards. But as I've been saying, Benjamin has been patiently waiting. So, without further ado, the one who has been a builder of a very, very accurate predictive model and a big TSM fan, please welcome Benjamin to the show. How's it going? Hey, no problem. Glad to have you on Talking TSM. Thanks for being the first one. Thanks for reaching out. So, you reached out to me. You said, hey, I have this predictive model that I've been using. I think you said it's been nearly like 80% accurate. And you were like, hey, if Doublelift does retire, I've been kind of using it to take a look at Lost. And so before we dive into that, I want to talk a little bit about what your predictive model is, how it works, and yeah, all that jazz.
Data that is published publicly from the league's API and put it to see if I can't get a computer to really tell me how these matches are going to end up. And at the end of the split, at the end of spring, I took the models that did well. I learned and based off of them, thought about what I can do to improve them or how can I evolve these, and replaced a few components that weren't working as well. So I have about 5 models running in tandem, and I use the ones that succeed as the basis for the new ones. The ones that don't work as well, I get rid of them. And so it's a constantly evolving thing. And I've gone through about 10 different models now with varying degrees of success. My least successful one stopped at about 50% at the end of spring. And over the course of Worlds, I had one that was about 80% accurate.
That's incredible. So, how long have you been kind of like a TSM fan / LCS fan then? Like, is this something you've been thinking about doing for a long time, or did it just come to you maybe last off season?
It really came to me last off season. I have been a TSM fan for a very long time, for the last 8 years, following LCS since it started in 2013. But the idea for a predictive model was something that I always thought would be interesting if it existed, but I didn't think that I could make it until I actually sat down and said, well, maybe I can try to make one or just slowly improve one until it becomes what I always wanted to find somewhere else.
Okay. I mean, that sounds incredible, honestly, and I can't wait to kind of see how, especially next year, it goes. With that, we're here. We're both TSM fans. We're here to talk about TSM. So with Doublelift retiring, you and I had been talking about maybe waiting to have you on until he either officially retired or until Lost was named AD carry for TSM. Now, literally 45 minutes to an hour ago, Doublelift just announced that he is retiring. Um, they haven't officially announced Lost, but they also haven't announced Tooney. So that's leading me and I think a lot of other people to speculate that Lost is probably going to be the guy to take over. So you said you've been running some predictions. Can you kind of run them down and tell us, what the team might look like with Lost as one of its components?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to individual players, I measure them position by position, all the ADCs against all the ADCs, how they perform in and out of lane. And just to name a few easy points, um, Lost beats out Doublelift fairly significantly in KDA, kill participation, first blood percent, gold difference at 10, and damage per minute, which are all very important stats when it comes to this model and performing in game.
Interesting. So, do you think can you give us some of the percentages or just kind of what that looks like?
Yeah, so actually, over the course of last summer, the regular season of the summer split, I had Doublelift as the fifth best AD carry in the league, which seems about right from the eye test. He was never really in the carry position, and there are people as in Sven and Tactical that obviously did a lot better and played more actively, while he had more of a scaling, consistent side, which was fine. And obviously, it worked for the team because they won the split. But I think that Lost in Academy, which I've also been watching very closely, was much more of that tactical esque active role, playing a lot more for damage and getting kills rather than sitting in lane and farming a la Doublelift. I would say just adding Lost to TSM, replacing Doublelift for this upcoming season, I would put them up several rankings depending on the model over teams like FlyQuest or 100 Thieves that are coming in kind of hot with these established players and teams.
Interesting. So that kind of drives two questions to my mind. The first one is, and if you can answer these in kind of succession, that would be awesome. The biggest one is, do you think your model is maybe geared more towards aggressive slash carry style players, and then and if not, what else kind of would you say we should be looking at slash should be taken into consideration? And then the second question is, so you really see him as um, somebody who could be maybe like the third or fourth best 80 carry in the league once he comes in?
Yeah, so I think the fault of the model and why it isn't a 100% model is that there are certain intangibles that you really can't gather. And I'm sure we'll talk about Sword Art or Huni in that regard. But just for an example, my model, it rates Dardoch very, very highly as of
Okay.
last season. Even though he didn't place as highly, the stats he produced on his team were very, very good stats if you just look at them against all the other junglers. Now, that did not translate to winning much, but my model does tend to like those types of players a little bit more.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. So then what about, looking at some of the options, right? So we have Sven, Tactical, FBI, Johnson, right? I would say that those are probably the big four. Then maybe right after that is Wild Turtle and Bang, depending on what happens with Bang. Nobody seems to know.
Hmm. Right. I think my model and my own opinion specifically, I think Tactical is at the absolute top. I think he's been performing the best stat wise, eye
Mm-hmm.
test wise. He's done very, very good job. Personally, I don't know if you saw the news, but Jack Etienne, the the founder of Cloud9, posted on Twitter today that 4 of his academy players from last year have been signed. Now,
Yep.
only 3 of those have been announced, and every team has a jungler. So, unfortunately, Inori, I don't think, will be getting that spot. So, that leaves
Yeah.
King or Tomo. I've been messing around putting them in here into Dignitas or Evil Geniuses who still need an AD carry. And I personally think that King could be the second or third best AD carry based on his spring academy performance.
Interesting. So, okay, so yeah, that actually brings up another really interesting point then. So, would you say that maybe some stats are skewed based on the fact that players are playing in academy? Now, to caveat that real quickly as well, there are a lot of academy players that are getting their chance in the LCS. If you didn't see today as well, Fake God and Soligo have been announced for Dignitas. Palafox, uh, Diamond. I'm trying to remember everybody. People even like Niles coming straight from college. There's a lot of new young talent. So, um, there it is possible and potentially even likely that if somebody like King were to sign with one of those teams, he could challenge for a top 5 spot, especially because most of the people he might be playing against are actually from academy. So, um, I guess breaking back to that, do you think that maybe it's skewed potentially towards academy just because some of those players are just so much better than the other options?
Right. I think that it's hard to at the beginning of the season, beginning of the splits, my week 0 predictions, which is what I call before the season has even started. My
Mm-hmm.
week 0 predictions are always the worst because I am comparing players from different leagues and different teams. Now, Jose Diodo and Nubi, which are supposed to be starting this year,
Mm-hmm.
both played in LLA, which is a very comparably weaker league.
Yeah.
Now, they could have absolutely destroyed that league, and Jose Diodo absolutely did. He had the best stats in that entire league.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that he will also produce those stats in this league. So yes, it absolutely does favor a higher performer in a weaker league rather than an average performer in the LCS.
Okay. I mean, that's really interesting. And I can't wait to dive into this more, and I hope to continue talking to you even after this podcast. But your segment's not done. We still have some time left. I want to talk about TSM specifically, right? So you see Lost as being this really strong player coming into next year. When comparing him, to Sven, again, we'll compare him to the top 4, what we will assume is the top 4 for next year, right? Sven, Tactical, FBI, and Johnson. You can maybe throw Wild Turtle in there as the 5th, and then we'll kind of see where everybody else lands. But from returning LCS players and adding Lost, where do you see where do you think personally, and where does um, your predictions have Lost when compared to those players?
So, unfortunately, I think Lost is at the moment a little tier higher than all the other players on TSM, maybe other than Power of Evil, and mostly because of what I talked about before. Sword Art, if we're assuming that Sword Art is coming, which is how I have it set up right now, Sword Art was not the best support in the LPL by any means.
Mm-hmm.
He brought a lot of intangibles. He was coaching Guan Feng. He was shot calling and doing macro. That did not translate to actual tangible stats. So just putting him plug and play into this model, it will not like him at all. And it will say he is terrible. He's an awful support. But we know that's not true. He was in the World Finals.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise, on the other side, Huni had a very bad year, and a lot of people can say that he performed a lot better on SKT and on Fnatic, but when he came in on Dignitas and on Evil Geniuses and Clutch, he did not have the same performances, and that can be excused somewhat by the team environment. But my model really takes those more recent performances higher than the old performances, and likewise does not rate him as highly.
Interesting.
So overall, my model doesn't have high hopes for TSM right now, but this is, I think, the worst it could get for them once they adjust to the league and start having actual comparable performances, or maybe once we see the rest of the roster, it may not even be those 2 players. This could completely change.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, and we're going to go into the rest of the roster. Once Benjamin and I are done talking, this leads me to one last question for you before we thank you for your time. Spica. We had a full split of Spica. How, in your model, did he compare to everybody else? And specifically, I can't remember, did you say you did do something with playoffs as well?
So right now, especially when I'm going into the new season, I only compare regular season because some players I feel would be unjustly represented by playoffs because some players were not in playoffs or they got eliminated very quickly in playoffs. Um, let's say, for example, Dardoch, who got 3-0'd in the losers bracket by TSM in summer. My model in the regular season toted him very highly, but in the playoffs, he would be extremely low. And it's hard for me to separate those two values because I think they're both valid. So for this first week 0 of my model, I understand these results are not going to be as accurate as I would want them to be. So this part is more of just for fun for me to see where they would end up.
Interesting. Okay. Well, no, I mean, I really appreciate your time, Benjamin. Again, a true data scientist out there in the world, taking his talents, making this predictive model, and being the very first ever Talking TSM fan. Do you have anything you want to shout out or anything you want to plug?
Um, I wish I did. No, I don't actually.
Well,
Oh,
you have a Twitter, right? Do you want to plug that?
I do. My Twitter is BCSGME. I don't talk about much league or data right now, but I'm sure I could in the future if this turns out to be interesting and I turn into be a prophet of some sort or appear on this podcast again.
No, absolutely. Well, I mean, I seriously appreciate you taking the time. I'm really excited to talk to you more even after this podcast. I have a lot of questions for you, so I'm sure that we'll be keeping in contact not only, probably right after this, but during the season too. So, thanks again, Benjamin, and yeah, hopefully we'll get to talk to you again on the show soon.
All right, sounds great. Thank you.
All right, and with that, we're now going to head into our next segment, which is talking, I should say, and taking a look at what Doublelift Retiring means for the LCS and for TSM as a whole. So, I guess before that, I'll talk about me personally. Doublelift has always been one of my favorite players, even when he went over to TL, even when he was on CLG. He was always somebody who I found to be very interesting. He talked a lot of trash, and it always felt like the LCS kind of needed that villain, and now we're losing him. You couple that with losing Bjergsen, and wow, it is it's tough. It is really, really tough. And for TSM specifically, it's going to be interesting to see what they do next. They have an opportunity, in my eyes. For some of you, you may see it as a massive downgrade, but for me, it's an opportunity to let some of the younger players do their thing. I don't think that they expected this when they signed Power of Evil, and I'm a little bit concerned about that for him and for the team. I think they're going to have to kind of tell him, hey, because the reason for this is because I think TSM is probably going to go young. With Spica and Lost, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to bring in Huni and even potentially SwordArt, somebody who's a little bit on the older side in terms of League of Legends age, at 23 or 24, I believe. And so, I worry a little bit about Power of Evil. I'm hopeful that he is still going to be okay with playing on this team. That I don't doubt his effort levels. I actually have a piece that'll be coming out probably this weekend talking about if TSM can break his 1-year wonder where he's basically been on every single team that he's played for 1 year. I don't know if they're going to break that or not. They might want to try Evolved next year, depending on how this team does. TSM is used to winning, and this will be the first year that I can remember where they have multiple very, very, very young and inexperienced players playing on the team, and that's only with just Spica and Lost. Obviously, Spica with plenty of experience, relatively, but still, only a split playoffs and a little bit of Worlds. So we'll have to see what they're going to do in the top lane and in the bot lane, but more importantly, I think we look at now, how does TSM branding recover, right? They have lost Bjergsen, they have lost Doublelift, and they let Broken Blade go. I bet they're kind of wishing, man, maybe we should have kept Broken Blade. I mean, can you imagine a team of Broken Blade, Spica, Power of Evil, Lost, and some young LCS talent, or even OPL? That would actually be a pretty interesting team to watch. I would personally enjoy that team, because I think that one of the things that League of Legends as a whole, and the LCS specifically, struggles with is allowing teams and players to kind of grow together. Everybody just always tries to win all the time right now. And I know that people are tired of making the comparison to traditional sports, but I come from a very strong traditional sports background, and so it makes it easier for me to make these connections. And I think that one of the biggest problems in esports is people write off certain talent way too quickly. And when I go into the TSM options for top lane here a little bit later, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. But back to the branding part. TSM have lost their 3 probably biggest brand players. And even if you want to say their 4th biggest in Broken Blade, he's still on their website, and he's still the one repping the jersey with Bjergsen. Those players are all gone now. And the latest commercial had Spica in it. I imagine we'll get a Power of Evil one. And if Lost comes in, he was already in a recent commercial as well, along with Dokla. There's a chance we see him too. But this is all new terrain for TSM. This is not even going to be close to the same team that we saw before. Not just player-wise, not just skill-wise, not just style-wise, but branding-wise too. And losing Doublelift is a major part of that. Because looking at it even from the LCS as a whole, TSM had the 2 biggest brand name players in the entire LCS. And now they're both gone. And, TSM are going to probably recover on that on their own. They have such a strong fan base on their own. So I'm not worried. Fans like myself, and I hope the rest of you who are listening, will really give this team a chance. Don't write them off if they are struggling at first. It's going to take time. It's going to take time for Bjergsen. It's going to take time for Power of Evil, for Lost, for Spica, and for whoever the hell is the top lane and the support to all gel together. Right? There's always been Bjergsen and the team. They don't have that anymore. This last split, we had Bjergsen and his relationship with Broken Blade, his relationship with Doublelift, Doublelift's relationship and Bjergsen's relationship with Biofrost, and the rest of the coaching staff. That is gone now. That does not exist. And so it's going to be tough, TSM fam. It is. But we have to just accept. And as long as this team is not getting shit on constantly, then I think we're okay. If they're playing hard and the games are close, if they're losing here and there, and if they're beating the teams they should beat, and they seem like they're coming together, then that's all that matters to me. And that's all that should matter to you. Remember, if this is going to be a season long, not just a split, but a season long, we shouldn't be looking at this team in terms of can they make a push for MSI, right? Because they're going to have that separate tournament. Who the heck knows what's going to go on there, right? More so, we should be looking at their growth in the first half and maybe 3/4 of this season, and hope that they can make a playoff push, make the playoffs, and maybe surprise everybody in the playoffs. Or maybe they'll exceed even my expectations. I'm just setting them at a realistic level. When you have a full, brand new team, and I know a lot of the LCS does too, But for TSM, this will be the first time that they're dealing with something like this in this extensive of a manner. It's going to be interesting. For the LCS as a whole, losing Doublelift and Bjergsen is a massive hit. There are a lot of fans of both of those players who watched just for them. And now, for fans of Bjergsen, because in esports and some in traditional sports too, people like to follow their favorite players. For Bjergsen, it's not going to be hard. Most of his fans, if not all of his fans, are going to still stay TSM fans. For Doublelift fans, it's going to be interesting for the LCS. Do they choose TSM? Do they choose Team Liquid? Do they choose CLG? I don't know. But the LCS is going to, is luckily going to be saved by the perk signing. I think that is going to bring a lot of fans, not only to C9, but I think it's going to help the LCS kind of brace against the loss of their two biggest homegrown stars. And hopefully with all the young talent coming into the LCS for the first time, with teams like FlyQuest, Dignitas, Golden Guardians, hopefully fans will rally around them and support them and allow them time to grow. And I guess I should put TSM in that too, especially if they go with Lost and Spica. And we'll see what they do at support and top, but they might have a pretty young kind of NA type team too. So we'll have to see. But either way, the LCS should be okay. TSM should be okay. But it is still a massive, massive loss. And now as we kind of head into the last part of the segment, or the last segment part of the show, it's time to talk about what in the world is going on in top and support now. For those who don't know, maybe 6 days ago, there were rumors that the SwordArt deal was falling through, and then Jacob Wolf tweeted as such that they were struggling to get him in because he would be potentially double taxed on his earnings, which would mean that he wasn't earning nearly as much to come over to TSM or to come over to NA in general. And because of that, everything else was on hold. Huni deal was on hold. Lost getting traded over there was on hold. And that was because Doublelift might not want to play if SwordArt or some comparable player from the LPL or LCK was coming over to play support for TSM. And they built their whole roster with this idea in mind, right? The idea was to have Huni in the top lane, Spica, Power of Evil, Doublelift, and SwordArt. That's why they let Broken Blade go, / traded him. That's why they signed PoE. They fully intended to compete this year. And now, almost out of the blue, semi-expected, Doublelift retires. And now Evil Geniuses are probably just sitting there like, what are we going to do? Because they probably have Huni. They have a verbal agreement with Impact now. Verbal agreements can be broken, but, are not smiled upon. And TSM has no clear top lane. It does look like they're going to have Lost. But now we got to wonder what's going on with SwordArt. There was a tweet from Suning that SwordArt was leaving the team. But there are a lot of LPL openings. There are even some LCK openings that he might be qualified for. Maybe, but pretty unlikely. Even some European ones. And even through all of this, even with the knowledge of what was going to happen today, Reggie has still been trolling all of us. He's been tweeting about life and effort and Lehans and SwordArt. And even, I forget who it was, somebody tweeted today that, Doublelift had tweeted them or had messaged them about, wanting to get back into SwordArt Online. And then he retires today, and it's like, oh my. Personally, I put out a piece today, my top 3 options for TSM, and this was assuming they were going to keep Doublelift and SwordArt, so I only put NA options, or OPL options. And the 3 options were Impact, Hauntzer, and Kumo. Now, I know there are some other options, solos out there. Fake God was out there until very recently. He got signed by Dignitas. And now we've got to wonder, does TSM even try to go international for their support? Do they maybe look top lane, right? Nuggery is somebody who's out there. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that TSM should or will sign somebody like Nuggery. I highly doubt it. I would be shocked, way more shocked than I am for the options at support outside of SwordArt. That said, maybe something happens. I had a bit of an inkling that they weren't going to bring on Huni because Reggie had tweeted very recently that 1 of 3 contracts were signed originally on the 16th, a little over a week ago. He had said 1 of 2 contracts, which would have meant SwordArt and Power of Evil. Then he adds a 3rd, and then the rumors come out, and then he repeats that 1 of 3 have been signed since PoE. And so I wondered, I was like, this trade for Huni must not be happening. I'm wondering if Doublelift told them after the SwordArt debacle that he was just not going to play. He had been talking about retiring anyways, so yeah. Now our top lane options, like I said, are potentially Impact, Hauntzer, and Kumo. Breaking down each one, I think Impact would be good. Without Doublelift and with Lost, it might be better than it would have been with Doublelift, weirdly enough. As Benjamin, who was on before, discussed, Lost is a lot more aggressive now. A lot more aggressive in general than Doublelift has been recently. So they could play through the bot lane instead of the top and just kind of let Impact do his thing up there and kind of let PoE scale on his own. But he became a little bit more of a roamer too recently. I'm still really excited, by the way, about PoE. I think he's going to be great. Hauntzer, I think, would be an interesting addition. He was actually playing pretty well by the end of last year and especially in the playoffs. But he was also really limited and probably, a bit of a downgrade from, not even a bit, definitely a downgrade from Impact. And then you look at Kumo, somebody who's only 20 years old, who's really only kind of been given a chance. He played on a team that did not really play towards him. They kind of just left him up there to die. It didn't seem like it was a great culture in Evil Geniuses from what it sounded like as well. And he struggled, but then once he started picking things up and people were like, oh, hey, Kumo might actually be reaching his potential, they decided they didn't want Jizuke anymore, so they were going to go Golden Glue, and Huni. And that went okay for them. And he kind of lost his chance for the rest of the season. So, those are realistically like the only 3 options. OPL has some options. There are maybe some people in Academy that I'm not really looking at hard enough. But to me, those would be the NA options available. There's not really much available in terms of EU as well right now. So, TSM are in a little bit of a hard place. And then when you look at support, they're in a really hard place. Or maybe I should say they were in a hard place. I am cutting this part in. The recording was yesterday. Then this morning, Thursday, Thanksgiving here in the United States, the 26th, TSM officially, finally announced, it was announced through the Washington Post, that SwordArt would be signing with TSM a 2-year, $6 million deal, which is a lot. I'll be honest. Apparently, according to Jacob Wolf, it might be the most expensive contract. So, well, in LCS history for sure, sorry. Potentially in League of Legends history. So, there's quite a bit to talk about real quickly here. Which means I'm adding at least a couple more minutes. I took out a part that originally was speculating on potential support options should they not get SwordArt, and kind of what the roster would be like. I did also, in this section, talk a little bit real quickly about Biofrost, how he might become a coach, how Doublelift will likely become a streamer, and that's where the three mainstays would go because, again, Biofrost said he had an exciting announcement while still streaming under the TSM banner. So we will have to see how that one goes for him. But in more important news, SwordArt coming to TSM off of Suning and off of a Worlds finalist team. There are some questions, but SwordArt really helped Huang Feng, I hope I didn't butcher that, come from, pretty much rookie / little experience into being one of the better players to help Suning get to Worlds. And now he'll be coming over, and likely SwordArt will be playing with Lost in the bot lane. Another young player who has some experience from the OPL, even from the LCS a little bit. Definitely an academy. And again, this is assuming that they end up signing or keeping Lost, which it looks like that's probably going to be the case. So they keep him, and that helps this team get a lot better much more quickly. A team of whatever they're going to do in the top lane, as I talked about, there's a lot of, well, not really. There's a couple different options. We'll see where they go. But at least a team of Speak Up, Power of Evil, Lost, and SwordArt looks like a team that might, depending on how Speaka and Lost develop and who they sign in the top lane, they could be a team that actually could really compete against TL and C9. Maybe not right away, but it could be a decent team. Pretty good team, I should say. Now, I will say, I think, it's funny because everybody's like, well, TSM won't spend money, blah, blah, blah. I'm a little concerned, if I'm being honest, at the amount that TSM spent and the fact that they did not get perks. Now, we don't know what happened there. But if they're paying SwordArt $6 million over 2 years, which is apparently more per year than what Perks is getting paid. Now, Perks obviously had a buyout. So there's that, which was apparently pretty substantial, anywhere from 3 to 5 million. But if TSM really are willing to spend, and they spend on SwordArt instead of maybe somebody like Karya, Lahan's effort, those Korean players, they must really feel like SwordArt is their guy. And they must feel like, one can, I guess, assume that that Perks preferred Cloud9, and thus TSM, never really had a chance at him. Or maybe they just really wanted to, if they were going to spend their load, they wanted it to be on a, LPL / Taiwanese / Korean support. And so, they went out and they got SwordArt of the options, from those places I just mentioned. And we'll have to see. I mean, SwordArt becoming, the expectations on him are going to be massive, right? For this kind of money, there is no doubt that they are going to really expect him to be more than just a solid player. Like, they expect him to come in and be one of the top players in the LCS with this kind of money. They expect him to be a leader on this team. They expect him, most likely, to help Lost get to a very high FBI type level. So, yeah, crazy news this morning. A lot of us expected SwordArt. I don't think any of us, and if you did, then please let me know, but I don't think any of us expected 2 years, $6 million. At least that is what is being reported. Obviously, that could be wrong, but if the Washington Post is putting it out there, and if Reggie is giving them some some quotes, then I would assume that's probably right. Which, by the way, Reggie says he expects this team to compete. He expects them to at least get to quarters in Worlds. Holy shit, that is a tall order. And that's a lot of pressure to put on this team. And we don't even know who the hell the top laner is going to be yet. So, wow. Expectations from when I recorded this yesterday weren't super low. I still think people need to be patient on this team. I do think they're going to be very good. And you'll hear that when it cuts back to the rest of it, where I ask you all to be patient. But wow. Wow. We'll dive deeper into this into the next show. Next week. Because I assume we'll probably know our top laner by then. But whew. SwordArt coming over. All right. Now it's going to go back into the rest of it. So thanks for listening. Yeah, here we go. So, there's hope, TSM fam, but we got to be patient. We got to, as they say in the traditional sports world, trust the process and allow this team, allow Reggie, allow Parth, allow Bjergsen, who has definitely made it clear that he has a lot of decisions on who's going to be on this team. Give them time. Allow them to figure things out and be patient. Please, I cannot say this enough. Just be patient with this team. They will figure it out. It may take longer than we like, but you're not a real fan, in my opinion, if you can't stick with the team through the good and the bad. And right now we're going through the bad, but there will be good again, and hopefully it will be sooner than later. All right, with that, that's the end of our show. So thanks for tuning in. The show, again, comes out weekly on Thursday for your ear holes. Big thanks to Benjamin for coming on. We did have a little bit of audio issues in the first couple seconds, so, make sure to reach out to him. Thank him for coming on. Make sure to go follow him on Twitter. Again, if any of you want to be on this show and have something that you would like to talk about, please reach out. I am also talking TSM on the subreddit, so feel free to message me there. But with that, I am Robert Haynes, and this has been Talking TSM. Talk to you next week.